You know, I heard somebody say this week that they were praying for God to punish their ex-spouse. And I thought, hey, wait a minute. Maybe God's already doing that. Can't always see it in the moment, but sometimes God has to deal with people outside of our relationships. He's not always dealing with us directly. Sometimes he has to use external circumstances to get our attention. When we think of God discipline, we often think of punishment. But listen, God's discipline is not always a punishment. God's discipline is preparation. The word discipline means to teach. When God disciplines us, he's teaching us. He wants us to learn something. And you know what's interesting? The person that I was talking to said, yeah, I need God to punish my ex-spouse because they haven't changed. Well, maybe that's exactly what God is doing. Maybe they've gone too far. Maybe they've crossed a line. Maybe they're living in such a way that God is allowing them to experience the consequences of their decisions. You know, sometimes we don't like those consequences. Sometimes we would rather those consequences be given to someone else. But sometimes God allows those consequences to come upon us so that we will change. Now, I'm not saying that we deserve the punishment. I'm not saying that any of us deserve to go through hard things. I am saying that sometimes it's the only way we will change. Sometimes God has to discipline us through difficult people, difficult circumstances, or difficult seasons. But if we're willing to be honest, we will see that every difficult circumstance is actually a divine appointment, a divinely appointed appointment that God has put in our life to teach us something and to prepare us for something. So instead of asking God to punish our ex-spouses, or punish the people who are hurting us, or punish the people who have hurt us in the past, let's ask God to help us to be more forgiving, to have compassion for others, and to realize that whatever we're going through, God can use it to transform us if we're willing to allow him to do it. You know, I heard a story of a woman who had an enemy. And for years this woman had been nothing but hateful towards this woman. But one day the woman found out that her enemy had cancer. And instead of rejoicing in her enemy's misfortune, she began to pray for her. She began to ask God to heal her. And eventually her enemy did pass away. But this woman realized that she hadn't prayed for her enemy to be healed. She had prayed for her to get well. And in that moment, she realized that she had harbored this bitterness and this resentment for so long that it had become a form of idolatry in her life. And she needed to let it go. Friends, let's make sure that we're not asking God to punish people, but instead asking God to help us to become more Christ-like, more compassionate, more forgiving, more understanding, more loving, and more full of grace.